This is our Waters Acquity QDa LCMS system that we have in the core facility. To the left of the screen we have and sitting on the ground is our Peak Scientific nitrogen generator. Above it, sitting on the bench, is our Alliance Waters LC system. To the right of that is the actual Acquity QDa Waters ESI MS. And to the right of that is the PC that controls the whole system. Prior to coming down to the facility and using the LCMS, please make sure to prepare your samples correctly. First, you should be aware that with ESI-MS, your sample should be dissolved in either methanol, acetonitrile, or water. Your sample should be dissolved down to a concentration of about 0.5 milligrams per ml down to about 0.01, in that range. Make sure that when you transfer your sample into the HPLC vial, which has got a total volume of 2 milliliters, make sure that it's about 3/4 full before placing it in the auto sampler. So the first thing you should do when using the instrument is turn on the nitrogen generator by flipping the green on-off switch. Once the nitrogen generator has actually been turned on, keep a close eye on the inner scale, the red scale. For pressure, make sure that the pressure reaches 60 psi. Then and only then will you go to the software and hit the operate switch. Please do not do this ahead of time. The instrument requires a certain amount of pressure in order to operate properly. It does a few checks, and if it finds that the pressure is actually below that, you can actually have the ESI-MS go into an error state, and it will be not useful for anybody. At that point, the core manager will need to be contacted in order to reset the system. This is not something that can be done by any particular user, so please be aware of this. So once your sample is prepared, make sure you come over to the LC, open the door, and you'll see a series of carousels in there. Just grab the one in front, and you can actually see the numbering system all around the carousel. Make sure to put your sample in whichever position you like, but make note of what position that actually is. So in this case, I'll be placing our sample in position 1. And you can grab it, put it back in the carousel, just move it side to side, make sure it's in the right position. And now you can close the door. So the software that we're going to be using to actually run the instrument today is MassLynx version 4.2. It should normally be available on the bottom of the screen. You can just maximize it. And within the software program is the MS console window, which is generally also open at the bottom of the screen and accessible. The main reason that you would need to go into this window alone is strictly to turn the operate switch on to the instrument. So you can just click on it, should turn green, then you can minimize it and go back to the main screen. Now what you want to do is you want to make sure that the system status here at the bottom left goes back to fully green before doing any operations on the software. It might take about 5 or 10 seconds. It's waiting for temperatures and other things to actually reach their set points. Good, we're ready. And what we want to do is we want to select both a file name or create a file name and an MS file. Those are the only 2 columns that need to be filled for every single sample that you're going to be running today. So in this case, we'll set it up for test as a file name, and MS file. All you have to do is double click on the window here, and you get a set of options. The only 2 options that you'll actually need to use from this pop-up are either the general full scan positive mode or general full scan negative. Now for general full scan positive, most of the molecules that you'll be running here will probably be able to be run in full scan positive. The odd carboxylic acid, phosphate or sulfate group that you may have where you have an overall negative charge, you would want to select general full scan negative. So in this case, we will select double click on general full scan positive, and it displays in the window here. So now that we're set up, We only have this single sample, but you can set up as many samples as you like. What you need to do is select the number beside each one of the lines, highlight it, and go to and use the play button to start the run. It will ask you save changes to the mass spec sample list. Absolutely, say yes. Another pop-up will come up indicating the samples that you're going to be running this particular time. Samples 1 to 1, we only have one sample, just click on OK. Now in this case we're just overwriting an old file. If this ever pops up, it's letting you know that you actually have a similar name or the same name. So in this case we can simply say yes and overwrite the file. Now if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll notice that it changed from not running to waiting for inlet start 1. And what this basically means is that you can actually now go and set up your HPLC method, and the sample will not start running until the HPLC has started. So the trigger for the start of the run will actually be the HPLC, which is why you can actually set up all your samples prior to setting that all up. So have it ready and we can head over to the HPLC next. So the solvents that are available for the HPLC are water, as it's labeled in front here. The half liter bottle is water, and the one in back is actually the methanol bottle. Whether your sample is soluble in just pure water, obviously you would use H2O, and in the case that your sample was either soluble in acetonitrile or methanol, that would be what you'd use for that method. This bottle is solvent A, and solvent B, which is methanol, is in back, and that'll be important when you come to the window here for the Alliance in order to distinguish which bottle you're going to be applying the 100% either methanol or water to. So in this case, the sample is completely soluble in 100% methanol, in which case we said that was bottle B. So if you take a look in here for the composition, you'll notice that A is 0 and B is 100%. That's exactly what we want. If you needed to change it, you would just use the arrow buttons to move. The white box is the one that's active, so you can just move it around. And let's say we had to switch it to 100% water, you would just type in 100, enter, 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 and then finally enter again, and you would see it change to 100% water. But we'll go back to 100% methanol because our sample is soluble in methanol. 0, 100, enter, 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 and we're back at 100% B. Please make sure that you have the correct solvent to run your sample through before getting started. Next thing you want to do is go up to flow, and no matter whether you're using 100% water or 100% methanol, your flow should always be the same, and that flow should be 0.4 milliliters per minute, and hit enter to start. Ideally, the back pressure of the system right here should be somewhere between 200 to 500. You can even run it even if it's reading 1,000, but please note if it starts to creep up beyond that, let the lab manager be aware of this so that corrective measures can be taken before the pressure really climbs and you can't use the HPLC. Now that you've set up basically the solvent to run through the ESI MS, what you want to do is go to the menu status button right down here, select it, and you're brought to a window that actually has two different methods that you can use to run your samples. Either normal B or normal A. Normal B indicates that you're using 100% methanol, and normal A here indicates that you're using 100% water. Once again, in this case, we're going to be using 100% methanol, so we'll stay with normal B, but if you needed to, once again, you can use the arrows to move around and to get to where you need to, and just select. Once again, you'll have to hit enter to go in the method, and the first thing that you'll see is a series of samples here where you can actually put your sample in this particular table. And you'll also notice that the method for running your sample is 400 microliters per minute, B, injection volume of 20 microliters, and 3.5 minutes runtime. This is standard when you adjust when you basically put more samples in to the list. Let's say 3. What you'll know is automatically the rest of the line will already be inputted. So there's no need to make any adjustments from function all the way to minutes. All you need to do is put in the vial position according to what you put in the carousel. So in our case, we only have vial number 1. So what we'll need to do is use the menu down here in order to delete the rows. So we're highlighted in here. I can just delete the row, go up 1, and delete 2 as well. So that this mimics what we're actually running and what's in our MS method as well. So we're running vial number 1, and it's in position number 1, which is where it is in the carousel. At this point, we're happy with this. In order to save the method, you click on exit, and a prompt will come up indicating if you want to save the changes, and the menu changes down here again. And in this case, you want to say yes. You've made the changes, you've reviewed them, and you're happy with them. And this will take you back to the original menu that we had prior to this. Now, in order to start collecting your sample, there's 3 things that you'll actually need to do in order. First, in this menu, you'll have to hit Run. A new menu pops up. Now, there's another button that's available called Start. You'll have to hit Start. And this is also a review of what you put in. So if you did make any mistakes to begin with, you can review them here before hitting Start. We know we're running a single sample in position 1, so we're good. We can go to Start. And last but not least, you can press on Stat. Stat indicates that you want to run the sample immediately. If you already had samples in here in the carousel and you were just adding samples, you could go to Routine, in which case it would prioritize it and put them at the bottom. But in this case, you're running a new set of samples, so you don't want to wait. So you can hit Stat right now. Now, what you will notice on top of the screen here, there are a series of options that are popping up indicating what's going on with the LC. Right now, it's just simply selecting the vial, so the carousel is moving over towards the injector. And then the injector will pick up the sample, inject it, and once it's ready to go, the run will actually trigger the MS to start collecting. So now that we've actually started the HPLC, it might take a moment, but you'll notice at the bottom of the screen here, it says waiting for inlet start 1. Once the sample has gone over to the injector has pulled up the sample and fully injected it, you'll actually notice that this waiting for inlet start 1 at the bottom of the screen here will switch to acquiring. At that point, we can actually go and start looking at our results because the collection will start immediately. Yep, switches to acquiring. Now what you can do is if you had multiple samples and they've already run and you wanted to process them, you could select any individual line, highlight it, and you can look at the data. In this case, we only have the 1 sample, so make sure to highlight it. The next thing you need to do is go to chromatogram and click on it. And what you'll see is an instantaneous look at your chromatogram up until the moment that you selected it. So only about 0.3 seconds has been collected so far. 0.3 minutes. So in this case, what you want to do is go to the stopwatch, click on the stopwatch icon, and just follow the collection live. You can see it collecting in it right now. Typically, you will be collecting data from about 0.6 minutes all the way to maybe 1 minute or even longer, depending on how concentrated your sample was. And typically you would see an absorptive peak here with some intensity as opposed to sort of what we're seeing as a baseline here. And you can double click anywhere in that region, and ideally you'll see your spectrum at that particular point. Now, all of the spectra run from 50 mass charge units all the way to 1250. So you'll see everything in that window. And ideally what you'll see is your +1 peak, indicating that you have picked up a proton from the solution. So if your mass was 277, then 278 should exactly be what you're expecting. At the same time as seeing a +1 peak, you can also see a +23 peak. The HPLC vials tend to have sodium in them. So if your mass was 277, it's possible you could see another peak at around 300. We don't see it in this case, so your entire mass should be, of your entire intensity of your peak should be under 278. Now, you can just close that. So you can double click at any point, like I said, in that window of 0.6 minutes to 1 minute. If you click outside of it, ideally you'll have just background, which is, as you can see right now, the 277 peak or 278 peak is gone. But if you have a weak signal, which seems to be that we have here, because it's barely noticeable, you can also right click across that peak, let's say from 0.6 to about 0.8, and drag. And what it'll do is it'll collect all the spectra within that window and average them. And sometimes it'll improve the look of your spectrum. Looks very similar in this case. Lastly, what you can do is you can also use this icon here with a summation function. And what this typically does, so let's just select it first. What you need to do first in this case when you've selected it is you, once again, right click and average where you have signal in this region. And also right click and average where there's noise. And you can select that as long as you want where there is noise. Once you've done that, click on OK. And what you'll have is a spectrum that is indicative of the signal that you have in your spectrum, subtracting out the noise. So sometimes that can also improve the look of your spectrum. If generally you have strong peaks, it's not terribly relevant. But in the case that you have weak peaks, you can actually, it actually will improve the look of your spectrum. Those are the three ways that you would typically handle your data. We'll close this. Now, if you notice, this is finished collecting at about 2.5 minutes. That is the runtime for all of your MS spectra. This is in contrast to the 3.5 minutes it is for your HPLC run. And the reason that is the case is that we've worked in an extra minute for each one of your samples to actually get flushed out of the system before running the next sample. So it's intentionally set up that way so that you have no carryover from one sample to the next. Please be aware of this. At this point, once again, let's say we'll average your spectrum. This is what you have. In terms of processing, if you're only interested in the peaks from 50 to 500, just left click and drag across the baseline and you can expand. If you ever have isotopic peaks that you're interested in looking at and want a smaller window, you can just simply, once again, go into a smaller range and see what you have. You can basically go back to the original spectrum by clicking on this button right here to expand. And if you want this data to be either saved or printed, you can actually go to File, Print, and go to Setup. And you can select either the Brother printer here or do PDF version 9. If we select do PDF version 9 and click OK, go back to OK here, this window will pop up and you can go to Browse and to the network drive, NMR Lab, ResNAS, ADS.UTM.U Toronto. It should always be on here. And we typically, we'll save the data for the Waters Acquity QDa here. So there's folder. And you can either create yourself a directory here. In fact, I would suggest creating your own directory, your own folder. In this case, I've created a directory for myself, for my data, and subdirectories for different users. So if I wanted to save the data, I'll just put in a sample name in this case. Hit enter and click on OK. We already have this file, that's fine. We're going to overwrite it. I know I can overwrite it in this case. Just click on yes, and your data is saved to that network drive. So you have a couple of options here. Now that we've run our sample, processed the sample, what we can actually do is shut down the system. In this case, it's relatively simple. You'll go back to the console window that had the operate switch on it. You'll just toggle it off, and what it will do is it will shut down both the ESI MS and the HPLC at the same time. So you'll hear a quick burst of air coming from the ESI MS and beeping coming from the HPLC. And you'll notice that the system is no longer ready because we've shut it down. Lastly, once both the instruments are shut down, you can actually go to the gas generator and just toggle the switch to off. So lastly, you wanna basically come to the HPLC again. You can click OK, just to indicate that yes, I recognize that the stop flow input was received. Last thing you want to do not let your samples accumulate in the instrument. You want to take them out, and if you notice, there's a new menu that's come up here, and you have a yellow tray in front of you, not the blue one. A was the one that ran from 1 to 24, and the one that we actually used to put our sample in, so you'll actually have to click on it, and the carousel should move around and bring your sample to the front. Take out the carousel, grab your sample, put it back in, close the door, and you're done. So please remember, prior to finishing up, that the MS method runs for 2.5 minutes, but your HPLC method runs for 3.5 minutes. So it is set up to run an entire minute after your MS collection has completed. Why this is important is because you do not want to hit the operate switch when you've seen your spectrum finish collecting, because if you stop before the 3.5 minutes is complete on the HPLC, you will put the HPLC in an error state, and the errors will need to be cleared once again by the core manager. Most people will not be aware of how to do this, and so it will actually disallow them from using the equipment if the core manager is not here to actually correct the issue. So please make sure, before coming down to the facility and using the instrument, in every instance, that you book the instrument ahead of time. Be respectful to others, and make sure that the instrument's available and that you're not going overtime and going into other people's time.